Have you ever held an ancient text and just wondered, could this hold surprising answers, maybe even challenging ones, to those huge questions we still grapple with?
Absolutely. Questions about life, death, ultimate meaning.
Exactly. What's the path? How do we find real freedom?
It's amazing how these things echo, isn't it? And how different traditions offer such, well, varied and sometimes counterintuitive ideas.
Totally. And that's exactly where we're heading in this deep dive. We're looking at a really fascinating, relatively short text from Hindu philosophy, the Jabala Upanishad.
Right, it's part of the Shukla Yajurveda. Small but significant.
And to help us explore it, we've got materials from a few places, excerpts from the Vedanta Shastras Library, Vivekavani, and also the World History Encyclopedia.
Good stuff. They give us translations, summaries, and that all-important historical context.
So our mission really is to unpack these sources.
Yeah, dig into them.
Find those key nuggets, understand the core ideas.
Especially on liberation, sacred space.
And that really famous, maybe radical view on renunciation.
Who can do it? When? What's it actually like?
Get ready, because this text, well, it had offered a viewpoint that definitely pushed some boundaries, even back then.
Okay, let's dive in. Where does the Upanishad actually start? The sources say it kicks off with a big question from Brihaspati to the sage Yajnavalkya.
Yeah, basically, where is Kurukshetra? That holy ground, the place God sacrificed, the abode of Brahman.
The ultimate sacred center. And Yajnavalkya's first answer points somewhere specific, Avimuktam.
Which is identified with Varanasi, right, Benares. The text describes it as the place Shiva never leaves. Gods perform sacrifices there.
And here's the powerful link to liberation. It says that in Avimuktam, Lord Rudra himself gives the Taraka Brahman mantra.
The crossing over mantra.
To people as they're dying. And this leads them to immortality, to liberation.
Wow. So the instruction's pretty direct.
Yeah.
Resort to the Avimukta, shall not desert the Avimukta. It's like, be there, connect there.
Definitely. A strong call to connect with that physical sacred space.
But then, like you often find in the Upanishads, the questioning goes deeper.
Right. The sage Atri steps in. He asks Yajnavalkya, okay, but how do you realize the infinite self, the unmanifest one? And where exactly is this Avimuktam established?
He's basically saying, is it just the city? Or is there something more going on here?
Precisely. And Yajnavalkya's answer is just brilliant. It plays on the names of the rivers there, Varana and Nasi.
Ah, the wordplay. So geographically, yes, it's where the Varana and Asi rivers meet the Ganges and Varanasi.
But that's just the surface level. The Upanishad immediately gives the spiritual meaning. Varana means that which wards off faults.
Faults committed by the 10 organs, the senses and actions.
And Nasi means that which destroys sins. Sins also committed through those same 10 faculties.
Okay, so protection and destruction of negativity. But where does this happen? Not just in the river, presumably.
Exactly. This is the reveal. The inner Avimuktam, the real powerhouse location, is internal. It's the spot between the eyebrows, at the root of the nose.
The third eye area, that's often where it's placed.
That's right. Described here as the juncture of heaven and this world. The meeting point.
A bridge between the divine and the earthly.
And the text adds that knowers of the Veda worship this internal point as Sandhya in their daily rituals.
So the huge takeaway here is the ultimate sacred place isn't necessarily somewhere you go. It's a state, a point within you.
Yes. Realizing this inner Abhimuktam is realizing your own self is not separate from Brahman, from ultimate reality. It's inside.
Mind-blowing stuff, really. Okay, so that's the sacred center. What about the tools, the practices mentioned?
Well, the students ask Yajnavalkya about a mantra for immortality, a practical question.
And the answer is?
Reciting the Saradrudya. Our sources explain these are hymns to Rudra, basically names or invocations powerful enough to grant immortality, found in the Yajurveda.
So specific sounds, specific vibrations are seen as key tools on the path.
Definitely. And speaking of powerful sounds, later on, especially when discussing renunciation, the text really highlights the Om mantra.
Om. Can't talk Upanishads without Om.
Right. It's presented as the mantra of liberation, the essence of the Vedas, Brahman itself, something to be deeply worshipped, the ultimate sound.
Okay, makes sense. Now, let's get to what many consider the real headline act of the Jabala Upanishad, the part our sources really focus on. Sannyasa, renunciation.
Yes. King Janaka asks Yajnavalkya straight up, Explain the rules, the tenets of sannyasa.
And Yanshavaka starts conventionally enough, right? He lays out the standard path.
Exactly. First, you're a student, brahmacharya, then a householder, grihastha. Then you retreat to the forest, vanaprastha.
And then finally, you take sannyasa, the expected sequence.
But here comes the twist. The Jabala Upanishad's unique contribution, this vikalpa, or alternative, Yajnavalkya says, or
The big or.
he may embrace renunciation from brahmacharya itself, or from the householder stage, or from the forest dweller stage. And then the kicker.
A person may renounce worldly life that very day on which distaste for it dawns on him.
That phrase is just revolutionary for its context, that very day.
So it doesn't matter where you are in the standard life stages.
Doesn't matter. The Upanishad is explicit. It doesn't matter if you kept your vows, performed your rituals, maintained the sacred fire, or even if you stopped maintaining it. None of that external stuff is the deciding factor.
It's purely internal, that feeling of detachment, that distaste for worldly entanglement.
That's the only qualification needed according to this text. It's a radical statement of individual spiritual autonomy. When you feel that call, you have the right, maybe even the duty, to answer it immediately.
Regardless of societal expectation or, family duties even.
That seems to be the implication. It's presented as an individual spiritual right, grounded in that inner experience of detachment.
Okay, so if someone decides to renounce that very day, what do they actually do? Are there rituals involved?
Yes, the text outlines some. Interestingly, it moves away from a big, complex Pajapati sacrifice, sometimes mentioned elsewhere. Instead, it prescribes an Agni sacrifice.
Fire sacrifice.
Yeah.
But with the twist.
Yeah, the understanding is that Agni here represents your own vital breath, your prana. So you're dedicating your life force, essentially, to the spiritual goal.
Internalizing the ritual.
Exactly. And there's also the Traitatavya sacrifice mentioned. This is about strengthening the three forms of Agni within you.
Often linked to the gunas, right? Sattva, rajas, tamas, purity, activity, inertia.
That's the common understanding, yes. Refining those inner energies. Then, after the sacrifice, you smell the holy fire while reciting a mantra about the fire returning to its source, the vital air.
And what if getting a physical fire isn't practical?
The text allows for that. You can offer oblations in water instead, reciting a specific mantra invoking all the gods. Water is seen as containing everything. Then you eat a tiny bit of the offering. It shows flexibility.
Practical spirituality. And what about external symbols, like the sacred thread worn by some castes?
Good question. Aitri asks that directly. How can someone without the thread be a brahmana, essentially?
And the answer?
It's profound. Yajnavalkya says the conviction, I am the self alone, that deep inner knowing is the renunciate's sacred thread.
Wow. Internal realization completely replaces the external marker.
Precisely. It's reinforced by a ceremonial sip of water, but the core point is the inner shift. Identity comes from self-realization, not external signs.
Okay. Now, the Upanishad then seems to take a slight detour, doesn't it? It talks about paths for those not taking formal sannyasa.
Yes, it addresses liberation paths for, as the text puts it, Kshatriyas and others not entitled to renunciation through that specific sannyasa route.
And what methods does it list for them?
Things like the path of the brave, meaning death in battle. Also, fasting unto death, entering water, entering fire, or undertaking the great journey until one collapses from exhaustion.
Now, this is a point our sources flag as needing careful handling.
Right. Because, as the sources note, some scholarly interpretations see this section as appearing to justify certain forms of voluntary death, almost like specific forms of suicide under very specific circumstances for these particular groups.
But it's crucial to stress, as the sources do, that this perspective seems to contrast quite strongly with earlier Vedic texts in the major Upanishads.
Absolutely. Those generally condemn suicide. So the Jabala Upanishad, according to these interpretations cited in our sources, presents a somewhat unique, perhaps controversial view here specific to these contexts. We're reporting what the text and its interpretations contain.
Understood. A complex point within the tradition. So, returning to those who are eligible for formal renunciation, what does the life of that monk look like?
The text describes the general characteristics needed to become fit for realizing Brahman. It paints a picture. Wearing ochre robes, having a shaven head.
The classic image of a sannyasi.
Yes. Accepting only enough food for basic survival, maintaining purity, practicing ahimsa, non-injury in thought, word, and deed, and living solely on alms.
And there's a provision for hardship, too, isn't there?
There is, a compassionate one. If someone is really suffering, say from severe illness, and can't perform the full ritual,
They can still renounce?
Yes, by making a firm mental resolve or just by reciting specific mantras. That inner commitment is what counts. The text says this way, prescribed by Brahma, still leads the ascetic to Brahman. The spirit matters most.
That's quite profound. It leads us towards the apex, right? The highest ideal described in the text.
Exactly, the Paramahamsa, the supreme renunciate.
And it even names names, gives examples of sages who embodied this.
It does. Famous names like Samvartaka, Aruni, Svitaketu, Durasas, Ripu, Jataparata, Dattatreya. Quite a list of legendary figures held up as exemplars.
And how are they described? What makes them Paramahamsas?
Their conduct is, well, it's described as being beyond ordinary understanding. They wear no distinguishing marks.
Meaning no caste markers, no signs of their stage of life, nothing.
Nothing external to define them. Their behavior is beyond the ken of worldly people, incomprehensible, maybe even seeming strange. They might behave as though bereft of their senses, yet be perfectly sane inwardly.
That's fascinating. Appearing mad to the world, but perfectly lucid within.
It suggests a complete detachment from social norms and appearances. They discard everything. The staff, the water pot, the bowl, the cloth filter, even the hair tuft and sacred thread mentioned earlier. All gone.
Thrown into water with a mantra, right? Bhus Vaha.
Yes. Symbolically returning everything to the elements. Because what are they seeking instead?
The Atman, the self alone.
That's the sole focus. They move beyond all external props and identities.
And the description of their physical existence is pretty intense.
Extremely. Possessing a form as one just born, which is often interpreted as meaning unclad, naked, completely free from convention, like a newborn.
Unaffected by opposites, heat, cold, pleasure, pain.
Completely. Accepting nothing except their sustenance. Just enough to keep the body going. Established in Brahman, pure mind.
And the details on getting food and shelter are stark.
They really are. Receiving alms directly into the mouth at the prescribed hour. No bowl, no storage, just immediate sustenance.
And totally equanimous whether they get alms or not.
Truly non-attached. And shelter. Without an abode. They might rest in an empty building, a temple, under a tree, an anthill,
An anthill.
a potter's hut, a riverbank, a cave, a hollow tree, basically anywhere. No fixed place, no possessions.
It paints a picture of absolute freedom from mindness.
Total non-possession. Their inner life is just as radical, making zero effort towards any kind of gainful activity.
Completely reliant on whatever comes.
Free from I and mine. Constantly meditating on Brahman, devoted only to the self. Actively working to eradicate all remaining karma, good and bad.
Until finally they just let go of the body in that state of total renunciation and absorption.
That, the text says, is the Paramahamsa, the pinnacle.
So bringing this all together, what's the big takeaway? Why does this ancient text, especially its views on renunciation, still resonate or matter historically?
Well, the key thing, as we've discussed, is that emphasis on individual spiritual freedom, that the kalpa, the choice to renounce whenever detachment arises.
That very day.
That was a big deal. Our sources really stress how this contrasted with stricter traditions demanding sequential stages or needing permission.
And it wasn't just some fringe idea.
Not at all. Major figures later on, like the great philosopher Adi Shankara, actually used this Upanishad, the Jabala, as the scriptural authority, the Vedic proof, for the individual's right to renounce.
So it provided a basis in scripture for respecting this deeply personal spiritual choice, even against societal norms.
Exactly. It enshrined a kind of spiritual autonomy, suggesting that the inner calling trumped external structures when it came to pursuing liberation. It's a fascinating glimpse into ancient Indian thought, valuing that personal path.
And it all ties back beautifully to the core Vedanta ideas we started with, Atman, Brahman, self-realization.
Right, the ultimate goal, achievable through this radical individual path for those who felt the call.
And reinforcing that idea of the ultimate sacred space being found within, even while acknowledging the power of external places like Varanasi.
The inner geography is paramount in the end.
So, wrapping up our deep dive into the Jabala Upanishad, we've journeyed from holy cities to the sacred space within the body.
Explored powerful mantras like the Sattardriya and Om.
Unpack that really striking, flexible view on renunciation, your inner readiness being the only key.
And contemplated the incredibly demanding, almost unimaginable ideal of the Paramahamsa life.
A life stripped bare, focused solely on realizing the self. It's a text that definitely challenges our notions about rules, stages, and who gets to chase the ultimate spiritual prize.
It really does. It centers the individual's inner state in a powerful way.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with maybe a few things to reflect on. Like, is the most sacred place you can find truly a location on a map, or is it a state of being you have to cultivate inside yourself?
And what would it even mean in today's world to be genuinely free from attachment and possessiveness? Thinking about that Paramahamsa ideal, how does that compare to our lives?
Or perhaps just reflect on this. How does the core message of this ancient text, the idea that your individual inner calling to a deeper path, deserve ultimate respect, how does that idea land with you right here, right now?
Definitely some rich food for thought there.